you could become the kind of the default name for that product, like take like Uber for getting a car. If you live in South Asia, Maggie for instant noodles, because you launched the product first.
How does a new member of the team feel like? Like if a team is moving very fast, I feel like they'll probably feel it like someone in a blender, because everything is moving like a fast food chain as opposed to a fine dining place, right?
As leaders, right? What are things that we can do to set up a culture of, speed but with guardrails? Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Our Tech Chronicles podcast. Before we get started, I want to say a big thank you to all of you, our subscribers. We just crossed 3,000 subscribers, and that's worth celebrating. Couldn't have come this far without you. We appreciate you subscribing, listening to our podcast, and commenting and sending us feedback. It helps us choose topics and talk about things that are relevant for you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Today's topic is about releasing software. We've titled it The Fine Line of Releasing Software Fast. It's going to be a fun one, so let's get started. As always, before we get started, guys, what's your personal red flag that tells you a team is going too fast?
More bugs and rework.
I would say no time to validate the UX designs with the customers. They're too busy coding.
That's a good one. I would also say, growing tech debt backlog, right? We're releasing stuff and just building a huge backlog of tech debt. Cool. All right. Let's start with why nowadays is it important to ship fast, though?
I can get started. I think shipping fast can lead to fast fortunes for some companies. Just to give some examples, like think about Slack. They skyrocketed from a beta release to a multi-billion-dollar valuation within few years. And most recently, Windsurf went from $0 to $3 billion buyout from OpenAI. I think companies make higher market valuation, market share for themselves by shipping products fast to the market.
I think Asank is talking about the initial release, right? But also it applies to the continuous release after that. And I think it is important to have a cadence of release in short cycles so that we have more customers to satisfy, because if they have any impediments, we will unblock along the way. And also it is one of the characteristics of a highly efficient team, because it gets into their muscle memory. They have rituals and processes to follow so that we don't get stagnant.
Very true. I'd also add, with the tools and technologies available to our disposal now, there's no excuse, right? Stakeholders expect software features, bug fixes to be released fairly quickly and tested and validated early on without waiting for months. So that's, I think that's why teams tend to want to ship fast. But let's now talk about when speed goes too far. Like, what are the downsides?
So before we get to that, can I add a few more things, Roshan?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned stakeholders. Like one of the biggest stakeholders is, depending on where you are, could be your VCs, could be your shareholders. And the reason that you want to be releasing products faster to the market, first, like I said, speed means like revenue sooner to the company. And especially if you are a startup, you can use that revenue you are generating to scale up and increase your product stack, right? So I think that's number one. The second piece is, if you go to market first, you can capture the market share early on, and because you become the company to solve the customer pain point early, right? And also you could become the kind of the default name for that product, like take like Uber for getting a car. If you live in South Asia, Maggie for instant noodles, because you launched the product first. And I think the third aspect of it is really for you to really survive out there, because there's a lot of competition. Releasing products iteratively and really early. Really keep your competitive advantage, whatever that advantage is, right? Because you're always beating your competition with new features, new enhancements that the competition doesn't have. By that way, you're able to retain your customers, so attract new customers because you have the best product out there. I think that's another angle to look at it from overall product profitability, commercial viability of your company.
Absolutely. I stated the obvious earlier, the bugs and the stagnation, but I think it also, like to Asanka's point, it keeps up with the evolution of the product. And also nowadays, customers expect a frequent release. Sometimes that is actually a deciding factor for going with one or the other, like how frequently are they keeping up with their system. And also internally, it keeps work more fun for the engineers, right? Otherwise, it'll be like if you're going to release it once a month or once a quarter, it's not so much fun, and there is not enough time to fail fast and fix those failures.
Totally agree with you. So, but what happens? So there's a fine line of shipping fast, right? And that's the whole idea of what we're talking about. So, like, what are the bad things that can happen? And we talked a little bit about that in the icebreaker, but I'm sure there's a lot more, and that we've already seen in our own experiences when you ship too fast. Maybe I can go first, right? And I've seen this firsthand in very recently. In fact, in one of my teams, we had this idea. We took a big bet on an internal product, and we knew what it should do, but also we had lots of inputs from various heads of engineering, right? We didn't have a product owner, so just set in the context, right? And so various heads of engineering used to come in and tell us, this should do X, this should do Y. And sometimes this feedback went directly to the developer. So some of these developers took it as this is direction and wanted to show and work on something fun, like you said, right? Spent the night, developed something, released it. Satisfied that particular head of engineering. But what happened out of that is there was no metrics on usage. There were no tests. Sometimes just shipping something meant that you sacrificed maintainability, performance. Like over time, as our database grew, performance degraded. And then we were like, oh, why was this done this way? Oh, this is why, right? So things like that we've seen. And so it's very careful to strike that balance and think about what you're building and try and build it the right way.
Totally agree, Roshan. I think we need to think about the motivation behind moving fast. Is it external pressure, or they have to follow it rigidly without much thought? Because some of the areas, like you pointed out, Roshan, one is definitely tech debt adding up. The other is sometimes there is not enough time to get an architecture view before we jump into solution, because they have to keep up and solve problems on a sprint basis. So I think there are some areas, like in my team, what I encourage is make sure we are only solving like bug fixes, small ones, little enhancements more faster. But for those that require a little more thought, it's okay to take few sprints and think through the usability, architecture, technical solution, and telemetrics and all that. So one way to measure if you are going too fast, the tech debt items getting longer, architectural items getting pushed back. Those are a couple of things I can think of.
So when you guys talk about the negative side of going too fast, it reminds me of the story that we learned when we were children, like the race between the tortoise and the hare, right? So what happened was like the hare ran too fast and got burnt out and ended up losing the race, right? But I wouldn't recommend the speed of tortoise either. That might be too slow. So definitely, like too fast doesn't mean that you would always win the race. To some of the points that you guys brought up, I think every team needs to have a clear definition of done, so that like regardless of how fast you are moving, end of the day, like you are able to meet the definition of done before you release the product. So you are able to check those guardrails, telemetry, user analytics, and have the right surround sound, not just the feature released to the marketplace. So I think that's also very important.
I love that you came up with another analogy. Love it. But you're spot on. I think going fast is good, but the things you mentioned, Asanka, are now table stakes. Test coverage, metrics, because you want to measure and see the thing that you shipped, is it actually useful, right? Continuous synthetic tests, right? Performance metrics. And I would also add, especially in the case that I mentioned earlier, getting buy-in from product and design, because sometimes when an engineer builds something, they don't really think through the user's experience of that. And sometimes that is like it's important to pause a little bit, get that buy-in, and then release something, because then it's well thought out.
Yeah, I think the challenge is teams are under like immense pressure to, do things faster, innovate faster, release faster because there's so much competition out there. But what we are talking about is like sometimes under that pressure, like you can do these mistakes. And these are some of the symptoms that you're going to see. When you see the symptoms, like you should like think, hey, are we going too fast? We are not meeting the definition of done. Like there's too much tech debt. There's low morale, low burnout, like members are not actively collaborating, uh, like they are having like consistent unrealistic timelines, like they are missing the goals like again and again and again. Like I think all of these are like symptoms.
Yeah, and also I feel like there is over agile project right now, because sometimes I feel like in some of the teams, even I was kind of pressured by peers to do this, but I wanted to hear your thoughts. Like right now, there's focus on velocity, the frequency of releases, volatility of releases. Like if the team is not sticking to 2 week cycle, if there's volatility, that's a bad thing. What do you guys feel about it? Because I feel like it is more about quality over quantity of releases, right? It's the outcome we need to focus on.
So we're kind of maybe touching on the next topic, right? What is the healthy speed, like
Yeah.
what is good fast look like? Is that right, Sean?
I was kind of asking a question in the middle. I wanted to hear your thoughts about, are those indication of like strictly following speed without thinking about anything else, or do we need to come up with new ways of figuring out? I guess we are transitioning to the next topic then.
I think speed is just one dimension. Definitely, like teams need to over a period of time increase the velocity of how they are delivering it. I think Roshan, you pointed out there are ways by which you can improve the velocity, like doing synthetic tests. I know there are so many other things we will discuss in this section, but your goal should be not the delivery speed; it should be the outcomes,
Yeah.
right? Are you delivering the outcomes that you are set out to do? That's how I would look at it. There's a big difference between speed and the outcome.
So moving on to our next topic of how can we still deliver quickly but deliver something with quality and with all the right things in place, right? One thing we have started doing is this concept of a thin steel thread. You guys heard of that? Yeah, it's like a minimal end-to-end implementation of a system that touches all the major components. Maybe they are not fully functional yet, but it's like an MVP going through all the different components to show that, okay, hey, the concept works, right?
Or
And
we call it spike through.
there you go, right? And instead of like maybe this thing we're building has like 10 features, this is like zero point 0.5 of something, but it goes through the entire thing. And then from there, everything is incremental, right? And you keep building. So it's still fast release cycles, but we're building on that thin steel thread. So that's one way to do it without trying to build all the bells and whistles in one thing, taking shortcuts, right? It's a thoughtfully executed, deliberate release plan.
Roshan, is that still a shippable product to the client, or is that more like an internal build to build on top of that?
Yeah, so excellent question. It depends on who you're shipping to, right? Depends on who you're shipping to. For us, for internal, this is something to start with to show stakeholders. It's turned off for everyone else except for the people who care about it. So in our demos, it is there, right? But it's turned off. I think heard other companies do similar things. They ship stuff to production, but they're turned off. They're behind a feature flag, right? So you could do something like that. So it's still out there. It's with other live code, but it's turned off, and only for a small subset of users they see the progress made.
Yeah, I
Like,
think we've used we use feature flag heavily for anything that requires more than a sprint worth of work. We like especially isolatable features, right? And then I think with canary release, it's extremely useful. You can, like Roshan said, we can target certain user base by any criteria. We just have to switch on, switch off, and then we can do A/B testing if we had different thoughts. So yeah, I've never heard of that
Steel thread.
thin steel thread. Should look it up.
I think another important thing is the whole strong CI/CD pipeline with automated tests, right? So that even then you're trying to move fast, the tests are in place to tell you that in case have you broken anything else, right? Because sometimes your a developer might be only testing their flow and may impact other flows as well that customers do care about. So a strong CI/CD pipeline with automated tests, super super important, right? Have that in place. These are like guardrails.
That's a
Right.
very good point, because one of the important thing is the ability to roll back, right? If the with the speed comes mistakes, and we should
Yeah.
expect that, and we should be able to quickly roll back. Sometimes it becomes complex when you identify the issue like several sprints down the line, then it becomes extremely hard to roll back. So that's where the feature flag is one method to isolate it, but then overdoing it also is a problem.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? It's kind of what we refer to as the two-way door, right? You should be able to roll things back. Another one is that you need to have some minimal quality gates and internal SLAs. You have to at least hit certain minimum criteria before you can release it. Like there has to be certain test coverage, certain pass rate, peer reviews. Agree on those, quality SLAs, a part of the team before you release it.
I think that, yeah, spot on, right? And that all comes in as part of, for me, a strong development culture,
Yes.
right? And so everyone holds each other accountable for having these quality gates, right? And also it's continuous learning. So let's say we do ship something and something breaks, have like a postmortem, a blameless postmortem, learn from it so that for the next cycle, we don't make the same mistake again, right? Mistakes happen. That's part of the software game, right? As long as everyone learns from it. Shan, you mentioned two fun things. You said feature gates, you said canary releases. Another one is progressive rollouts, right? So
Yes.
you start shipping to smaller cohorts first, learn from it. If something is broken, roll back, right? So I think there are a lot of things in place that we can, or guardrails that you can put in place to prevent mistakes leaking out. What
Right,
else?
and we also flip between our DR location every time we release. So that also is healthy, right? Because we always have the
Mm.
DR ready in case we need it.
I also want to make sure, like when we talk about, fast or speedy product launches, it's not the same speed for every company,
Mm.
right? It could really depends on what kind of product, what kind of reputation is at risk. Like think of a company like Apple, like they take their time to perfect the product because they care about their reputation. I think it's true for most of the, companies that have established brands. Like even if you are launching a new product, like just because you want to do it fast, just you have to think of what is the downside of having a risk. Like, like take Google Glass, like failed right when they release it because they tried to release it too fast. They didn't think of everything. So you want to be successful, like that's the key most important thing. And these are tools and guardrails that you have to put in place to like that you're building a good engineering product. But good engineering product doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be successful in the marketplace. That's why you need to, Roshan, you brought the point, like we need to, integrate user experience design as part of that. So it's like you have to have that end-to-end integration, and include all of these part of your shipping lane, so to speak, for this.
Asanka, you just brought up something so so important, right? It's about knowing your market, right? So if you're shipping to, let's say, a consumer market, maybe you can get away with shipping stuff quickly, um, and um, and there may be some bugs that leak. Maybe the your consumers are a little more tolerant. If you're in enterprise market, these companies rely on our product. Some of these companies have tenured employees who've gone through 10 trainings. They expect buttons to be where they are, not moving around, right? So, because that's how they know how to use their software. So, for those scenarios, you have to be very careful in how you ship stuff. It has to go through the proper procedures and release cycles. You can release stuff, but you can't break stuff, right? So,
Right.
that I think that's very important.
A really extreme example, think about just because of the recent events, like think about the B2 bomber, right? I mean, there's no, like you don't have an option to go wrong, like with even a simple point getting detected by your radar, right? So it's gonna take its time to
Mm.
perfect it, build it, test it to the extreme, right? Before it becomes a product that can be, used. I mean, it's a very extreme example, but the point is like there are use cases where you need to, spend time perfecting it because the use case is as such.
Mission critical.
Mission, exactly. That's the right word.
Even here within for us at Atlassian, there are certain customers who have signed up for early access programs. And so they do get features early to test and provide feedback, but they've signed up for it. There's this level of expectation. But there are other massive enterprise corporations who have not. And so we have to let these features soak, learn from the feedback we get from these EAP customers, and then when we are very, very confident, ship it to or flip the flag and ship it to these enterprise customers. So, sometimes a company can do both, but it's how they do it, which is what's important. Good stuff.
How does a new member of the team feel like? Like if a team is moving very fast, they'll probably feel it like someone in a blender because everything is moving like a fast food chain as opposed to a fine dining place, right? Where you can learn and master. Any thoughts in that?
Yeah, that's a good one, Shan. I think the key there is onboarding this new engineer, right? And giving them time to learn the lay of the land. Learn, when I say lay of the land, it's like the team as well as the code base, right? And like not to put too much pressure on the individual to ship something quickly because of this culture that we set up. And so have them shadow a few times, make sure that the testing is really thorough, and then slowly bring them into this blender, as what you just said.
So it sounds like the right pace would be yes, go at the right, at speed, but also keep in mind there is documentation, minimum level of
Yeah.
documentation for onboarding a new member. So when we start to kind of sacrifice or put those things less priority, then I think that then it might be an indication that we are going too fast. We're not thinking about other areas. Is that right, Prashant?
Yeah, I would agree. And plus, just because you have these fast release cycles doesn't mean that everything has to go in these quick cycles too, right? The new joinee, new employee, engineer can build their feature and say, "Hey, I'm going to take my time testing it, and maybe next week I might be ready to turn it on in a staging or something like that," right? So it doesn't mean that everything has to go immediately.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the velocity is associated with the team, right? Not necessarily with each of the individuals, depending on how we have constructed the team, but usually it's with the team.
As leaders, right? What are things that we can do to set up a culture of, speed but with guardrails?
I would say going back to what I was saying about all the matrices, right? I think today's leaders are probably, some of them, not all of them, might be inundated with looking at data like how frequently we are releasing. If we miss the frequency, there will be a investigation as to what really happened. And also velocity is taken too seriously. Volatility sometimes, in my point of view, sometimes those volatility has a reason behind it because we need to think about the outcome as opposed to the quantity of the values we release. But one thing I am very big on is to do retros, right? So sometimes I pop my head into this retros, and if they're just having a retro for the sake of doing it and not really going down the details, then I know they're just doing it because now it has become a pattern, but it should be more effective. So that's something I look in my teams.
I have an interesting one, which is avoiding hero culture. And I'll explain what this means, right? So sometimes, we have this team, high performing team, they're releasing stuff really fast, and someone goes to a particular engineer who's actually notorious for being quick with their work and say, "Hey, release this for me." And so we're kind of like stroking their ego. They release something really quickly, and they're praised for doing this. Now think of the downsides though there, right? As a manager, now this person has released something, has not brought the team along with them, right? They've done it all on their own, maybe written hundreds of lines of code, and so everyone's playing catch up. Plus, maybe incurred a lot of tech debt, and all this is seen later on, not immediately. So the immediate thing is, oh wow, this person did it like so fast. Wow, he or she's been celebrated. Awesome. And you're creating a culture now of heroes, which we don't want, right? I've seen that happen, and it's sometimes hard to untangle.
Yeah, another point I think is kind of what we discussed earlier as well. Like you have to set up an ownership culture, not a like just a delivery culture. So ownership culture really means you own the outcomes, like you are accountable for the outcomes, not just building something. So you really take time to understand the customer problems, solve it the right way, and test it out and release it and retest it, as opposed to delivery culture, which is saying, hey, you have to produce so much story points every sprint. So you're thinking more like almost like a product versus customer orientation, right? There's a big difference in being a product company. When you say product company, like product mindset versus being a customer centric mindset, right? So we get more customer centric mindset if you have that ownership culture. So as leaders, one thing that you can do to help is have that ownership accountability to the team, right? So you have to let go and have them own how to solve the problem.
I like that. And one other thing we do in our team is about the ownership culture is that I know I keep saying this, I love feature flagging so much, is that every feature we have a feature lead. So we basically exercise the feature lead owns that whole end-to-end user journey and they are accountable and they are the ones who are experts who will train others. So I think that also makes this more entertaining and fun for the team.
I
So
like that.
Sean, do you rotate the feature leads from one
Yes.
feature to another? Oh wow, that's
Yeah.
cool.
That's a good one. Yeah. Maybe another thing I would say is, like you said, as part of the ownership. So as a leader, celebrate the wins, learn from the mistakes, right? And keep a track of your gauges. Remember, we talked about this stuff, the tech debt backlog. If it's growing, maybe it's time to pump the brakes now, slow down a bit, right? If the rate of rework is high, right? Or you ship something and there's no metrics, there's no visibility into usage. Let's slow down a bit. We cut some corners. Let's get this right and then maybe start again. Things like that I think are important, knowing when to go fast, when to pull back a bit.
Absolutely. And as a leader, I get pressure from the product side, right? I mean, we need to keep an eye on that too because product team can put a ton of pressure on the development team. As an engineering leader, you have to protect them. At the same time, I have to also protect my team from my manager because every quarter they wanted to show accomplishments. Every month they wanted to show. It's like it's a volume game. That's all you did, just one feature? Yes, because it's so complex, right? I think these are things that we need to probably feel a little bit mature about protecting.
Yeah, like managing stakeholder expectations,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Gosh, yeah.
Right, right. And plus, you need to do a good job, helping team do trade-offs, especially like you have new requirements, new changes, because fast product launches mean you are being more responsive to the marketplace. So sometimes you have to reprioritize something, instead of what you're working on, or you might need additional capacity. So, being a leader is also helping have those trade-offs, putting right resources, capacity, providing that direction, where to focus the energy to build that out faster.
Man, that can be an episode on its own because there's so much in that trade-off conversation like tech debt versus functional business requirements. It's always a battle as an engineer, I'm sure, Roshan.
Yeah. No, that's a great great bit of advice, Asanka. Thank you for bringing it up. And I think maybe we should wrap up on that note, right? Really fun conversation. We talked about why shipping fast matters, right? And then all the pitfalls of going too fast. Then while and then what are the things or guardrails we can put in place that enable the team to still move fast but minimize mistakes and cutting corners. We also talked about uh, the importance of leadership. So maybe we end there. Thank you for a really fun conversation. See you next time.